Leslie and I spent the greater part of this year in Japan helping get Ambit's business off the ground there. And it's been an exciting adventure so far, and it looks like we may be there for many more months. So one of the things I thought I'd do for our U.S. consultants today is give you a few facts about the country of Japan that you may not have known. For instance, did you know that the country of Japan consists of 6,852 individual islands? It's true. Haven't been to all of them yet. They record 1,500 earthquakes a year. You think about that, it's over 4 a day. Have been in a couple of those. Japan has 110 active volcanoes. They have 4 different writing systems: kanji, katakana, hiragana, and romaji. Japanese is considered the most complex written human language in the world. It's also home to one of the world's largest hornets. That thing is 2 inches long with a wingspan of about 3 inches, and the stinger is 1/4 of an inch long. And if that doesn't scare you, they call it locally the yak killer. That says all you can say then. So, moving to Japan's been an exciting adventure, but it's also been one of the most challenging things I think Leslie and I have ever done, especially in Ambit. Forget the hornets, just the differences that you've got to contend with: language and culture and cuisine and space, and especially time. You know, Osaka, Japan is 14 hours ahead of Dallas, Texas. So in Osaka right now, they're having breakfast on Sunday morning. And trust me, it is not bacon and eggs. But the Japanese, they have an amazing history and culture. Their country's so much older than ours. Archaeologists can date Japanese civilization, meaning people living on the island, as far back as 3000 BC. There are homes in Japan and Kyoto where families with the same last name have lived in the same home for over 800 years. Hey, think about that. So I think that type of continuity in history, it makes you think about things differently. And so I think there's a lot that we can learn from our new friends there. I want to talk about a couple of those today that I think are uniquely Japanese that will help you think about yourself and your Ambit business in a different way. And my friend Ishihara referenced it earlier in his remarks. The first one of them is the samurai. I mean, that is uniquely Japanese. Since I was a boy and I saw Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai for the first time, I've been fascinated with these warriors. Samurai were kind of a necessary byproduct, I guess, of Japan's feudal system. And they emerged in Japanese culture around 1000 AD. They were hired by wealthy hereditary landowners called daimyos to help protect and keep their holdings. And so the wealthier these guys got, the more the samurai became needed, and the more samurai were needed, the more crucial recruiting and training became. So these guys were essentially human weapons, singly perfect killing machines, who were given great status in Japanese society, but who were sworn by honor to obey the commands of their daimyos without question or complaint. Samurai were trained in all forms of combat: hand-to-hand combat, archery, strategy, tactics, but most especially, they were expert swordsmen. Their katanas were not only perfectly made weapons, they were works of art. And these samurai swords took months to make through an intricate process of layering hard and soft steel together. That once you see these things and recognize the beauty of them, you also have to recognize that they are the finest blades in the world. They became renowned all over the world for their quality. The sons of samurai, boys from the age of 4, began to practice with real blades made specifically for their size. Those training methods for samurai, they became codified in writings which were used to create schools. By the time a man achieved the designation of samurai, he had probably been training with a real blade for over 10 years. He would become so attached to his sword that he would sleep with it. The sword masters who trained samurai believed that at some point in their training, the body, the spirit, and the sword of a samurai became one single thing. And that ultimate expression of proficiency was the ability to direct that single thing perfectly by what they called the unfettered mind. The essence of the idea was that samurai could defeat any foe or any number of foes by simply doing what they were trained to do without ever thinking about it. Without thinking about themselves, without thinking about their sword, without thinking about their opponent or his sword or anything else. This gentleman is a modern-day samurai. He's 37 years old, and he's been practicing his swordsmanship since he was 5 years old. This gentleman is not a samurai. If you think that's funny, you should have seen the pictures of me in the samurai armor. They were just sad. So, but look, I wanted to take a sword lesson just to see what it was like, and I thought they'd give me one of those wooden swords to practice with, you know, the kind that you can't hurt yourself with. Turns out I hired a samurai from the only school in Kyoto that insists on training with real swords. So in one lesson, I nearly cut myself 2 or 3 times just putting the sword back in the sheath. There's a whole process for how to do that properly that clearly I didn't learn quickly. And that the gentleman that you saw in the blue outfit, he was my instructor. So I asked him, I said, "Have you ever cut yourself?" He smiled, he held up his hands, and he said, "Many times. Scars are the evidence of a true samurai." That made me feel a little better, but you know, he had all his fingers. So he'd been doing something right. Before the lesson, I had visions of becoming like Will Adams. I don't know if y'all know who Will Adams is, but I thought it'd be an interesting story to share with you because he's the first Englishman to reach the island of Japan, and I think he was uniquely responsible for creating, maybe saving the nation of Japan. See, he had been an officer in the Royal Navy during England's war with Spain, serving under Sir Francis Drake. And after his commission was over, he served as the captain for the Dutch East India Company, they provisioned him from Rotterdam in 1598 with a fleet of 5 ships where he was what they called the pilot major, the person responsible for the fleet. And the fleet's original mission was to sail from the west to the west coast of South America, where they would sell their cargo for silver. They were only supposed to go to Japan if that first plan failed. In that case, they were supposed to sell their goods in Japan and get silver, and then go to the Moluccas, Spice Islands, to buy spices and bring them back to Europe. So these 5 ships, these vessels, they ranged from 75 to 250 tons. They were crowded with men. They were driven to the west coast of Guinea in Africa, and then on through the Straits of Magellan. But they had terrible weather and several other disasters in the South Atlantic. So only 3 of the ships made it through the Straits of Magellan. Adam's ship was the first one through, and so he waited for the other ships in Floriana Island off the coast of Ecuador. However, only one of the ships had arrived by the spring of 1599. He didn't know what had happened to the other one, and so they were a little nervous about staying there. The Spanish were still at war with England, so the captain of the other vessels, together with Adams' brother, they found out later, lost their lives in a violent encounter with natives on the way there. Their ship actually escaped. The casualties remained behind, and the boat later reached Indonesia, and the rest of the crew were killed by the Portuguese army. So here's Adams. He's scared of the Spaniards. He's setting off the coast of Ecuador. He decides to leave with the 2 remaining ships he's got, go across the Pacific to Japan. That was late in November 1599. On their way, only 2 ships made it, and when they reached Japan, they stopped off, I think, on the way in what he says in his diaries are certain islands. They think it was Hawaii. It must have been because he had a huge amount of desertions. And so he's now got a skeleton crew trying to get these ships to Japan. In February 1600, a typhoon claimed one of them. And so all the souls aboard that ship were lost. By the time Adams gets his fleet anchored outside of Japan on April 19th, I think in what is today what they call Usuki and Oita Prefecture, there were only 9 surviving crew members. And they were too sick to even go to land, so they stayed out there in the bay for a number of weeks to try to recuperate. When they were finally able to get on their boats and go to landfall, they were met by Japanese locals and Portuguese Jesuit priests who had pleaded with the local authorities to execute the men, saying that Adams and his crew were pirates. So that was their welcome. The ship was seized. The crew was put in prison in Osaka Castle on the orders of Tokugawa Ieyasu. I probably not pronounced that right. These Japanese names are tricky. The Daimyo Ito and a future shogun of Japan. Fortunately for Adams, though, Tokugawa was a wise man. He didn't necessarily look at Adams as a threat, and he wasn't sure that he bought what the Portuguese priests were saying. He also happened to be in conflict at that time with another powerful daimyo over control of Japan. Japan had been embroiled in centuries of civil war. He wanted to end the conflicts and restore peace. And when he looked at Adams, he didn't see a pirate. He saw a man who knew how to build ships, pilot ships, and who just so happened to have brought 19 brass cannons with him on the ship that made it to Japan. So within weeks, Tokugawa had released Adams from prison and made him an advisor. A few months later on, in October, on the 21st, 1600, he met his rival, Ashita Mitsunari, on the battlefield of Shinagara. That picture up there is an old paper representation of this battle. You'll see them all over Japan. It's a very famous battle. It was the largest battle of samurai in the history of Japan. Between Tokugawa's eastern army and Ashita's western army, over 200,000 samurai faced off against each other to decide who would control the nation. And when the morning fog cleared, fighting began on both sides. It was fierce. Tokugawa's forces, though superior in capability, were evenly matched by the opposing force who had taken higher ground. And so as the battle raged throughout the morning and into the afternoon, both sides held their positions. And it remained deadlocked through most of the late afternoon until finally a few of the daimyos who had not decided which of these gentlemen they were going to support finally put down their neutrality and joined Tokugawa. That's when the battle turned. But after that, Adams' brass cannons were deployed. And within hours, the battle was over. 3 years later, Tokugawa would take those same brass cannons and point them at Osaka Castle and obliterate it. He needed to do it to solidify his power by removing the Toyotomi clan, people who had been allies with his at Sekigahara. But he destroyed the entire family so that he could take complete control of Japan. Adams went on to become Tokugawa's ambassador to the West. He helped instruct the shogun's shipbuilders to replicate the larger English vessels that he had brought over and to create the first Japanese Navy. He opened trade with the Dutch and English. And he ultimately adopted Japanese dress and took a Japanese name. He became the first man from the West to be named a samurai. And he lived the remainder of his life as a wealthy man known affectionately throughout Japan as the pilot. Adams died in Hirado, north of Nagasaki, in May of 1620 at the age of 55. He was buried in Nagasaki-ken, where you can still see his grave marker today. The Tokugawa shogunate ushered in a period of peace in Japan that would last 250 years. There's a town in Tokyo Angio-cho in modern Nihonbashi that is named for Adams. And there's a monument still there located at the address of his townhouse where he lived. And every year on June 15th, still, the city holds a festival in his honor. These samurai that survived that battle, they went on to hold the peace until the 1800s when the emperor nationalized defense and opened Japan's borders. And he made it illegal for samurai to carry their swords in public. These men and women of extreme discipline and skill, they didn't disappear. Instead, they became writers and poets and teachers and business leaders, and they ushered in a period of prosperity never before seen in Japan. You know, in Western culture, we obsess about perfection. Everybody wants the perfect job, the perfect house, the perfect car, perfect spouse. I think sometimes that obsession doesn't stop until we have sanded down the rough edges of reality until there's no substance left. I don't know, maybe it's because their culture is so ancient, but Japanese, they embrace a philosophy that true beauty exists only in the imperfect, the impermanent, and the incomplete. So the samurai, you know, just like the scars on their hands, they recognize the beauty in broken things. The philosophy is called wabi-sabi, and it appreciates life and people, and it understands with kind of an honest recognition that our scars make us stronger and more beautiful. They don't hide them. They don't try to get rid of them. They acknowledge them. And it's a life that learns to embrace damage and see the value and the lessons that it teaches us. You know, when you see a floating stone in one of those perfectly manicured sands of a Zen garden, that's wabi-sabi. They drink tea from these rustic, irregularly molded tea bowls. On purpose, they make them imperfect. That's wabi-sabi. There's a Japanese word, even in Japan, like when you break a mug or a pot, they don't throw the pieces away. They put them back together. It's called kintsugi. It means the golden repair. It's the art of restoring broken pottery by sealing the pieces together with gold so that literally the fractures are illuminated. It tells a story. And it's not only the idea that imperfection can be part of the unique beauty of something, but that it can also be the genesis of something new. They believe stress causes learning. You introduce imperfection, systems evolve. In essence, I think wabi-sabi is like that grain of sand that irritates the oyster into producing a pearl. New businesses and industries are formed to address economic imperfections. Opportunities present themselves as the solution to a problem. There is no change without adversity, and normal never causes things to get better. Only challenge, damage, and scars can be the genesis for transformation. I think this idea that could come from only a culture that ancient might help us view things from a different perspective. You know, the time difference in Japan is probably the biggest thing for me that's been a challenge. It's 14 hours ahead of Dallas. It's very isolating. The only way you can connect is to stay up really early in the morning, and that just can't sustain that. So maybe that's why I picked up a book this summer called Your Brain's a Time Machine. I was trying to figure out how to, make that work. It's by a neuroscientist named Dean Buwananama. And what I thought was going to be a scientific explanation of how the brain understands time turned out to be something totally different. Most people believe time's linear, that there's a past, there's the present, and there's a future. Einstein and others over the past 50 years have offered compelling theories, though, that time, like space, is eternal. In other words, time is to now as space is to here. We live in what these physicists call a block universe of space-time, where time is a fourth dimension. So it's like the coordinates on a map, they say. There's longitude, latitude, and elevation, and all of that. But they think time is another coordinate in that space block, which theoretically means that if you were able to input all four of those coordinates in the right technological contraption, that you could travel to those exact coordinates, including any time in past, present, or future. So, in other words, physics tells us that the past, the present, and future are all happening simultaneously in this universe. And yet, our minds clearly delineate between the past, the present, and the future, which leads to an interesting question. Is there something about the human mind that understands a quality of time that science has yet to be able to explain, or is the flow of time a fiction? This book was asking those questions. I didn't know those were questions. You know, they think maybe our brains have simply created this illusion that we're moving down a track away from the past and towards the future, a future that in actuality already exists and is already written. I don't understand that. But this idea apparently greatly disturbed Einstein, and he spent much of the later part of his life trying to reconcile it. He once said that the experience of now means something special to man, something essentially different from past or future. But this important and obvious difference could not occur in physics. So obviously the idea that the future already exists is a giant blow for anybody making plans for the future, right? Or the idea that we have free will. And so I'm halfway through this book and thinking, God, do they really believe this? And then at the end, you see that there's these new physicists. And listen, the reason they believe this, there's a lot of compelling theoretical evidence that it's true. So they believe that everything that's happened, that will happen, has already happened. And they believe it because their math tells them that. And you know, they're mathematicians. But other people grappling with the same dilemma, they've taken a different view, and at the end of the book, they get to that. These other guys, they believe that this block universe of space-time is actually evolving. The past is locked. It's still happening alongside the present, but the future is undetermined. And they say, you know, the only thing that they can figure out that determines what that future looks like is the decisions that we make in the present. Sounds a little more compelling. You know, I was thinking about all this, the past, the future, the present, and how could that all be happening at the same time? I was reading an article about the tsunami that happened in Japan on March 11, 2011. There was a 9.0 magnitude earthquake that triggered this huge wave at the northeast coast of Japan. Like 15,000 people perished in that. Hundreds of thousands of people were left homeless. What was interesting is during the cleanup, when they were going through and, you know, removing all of the wreckage, there were a number of reports of large stones that were found in some of these designated areas. Today they refer to them in Japan as the tsunami stones. Each of them were inscribed centuries ago with a warning. And it says, do not build your homes below this point. So I guess in that case, the past is still happening. It speaks to us in the present, encouraging us to create a future for ourselves that's not yet defined, if we can hear it. And you know, on my walk through the streets of Osaka in the morning on my way to the office, I think about Will Adams. And I wonder if he had any inkling when he was watching Tokugawa place those brass cannons in front of the walls of Osaka Castle, that he had been the catalyst for the unification of Japan, and that he was the harbinger of 250 years of peace for a nation consumed in civil war. And I also wonder what the brass cannons of the Ambit Opportunity will bring to thousands and thousands of Japanese over the next decades. You know, it had rained for days before Tokugawa met Ishida on the fields of Sekigahara. And what had planned to be a battle of two opposing masters of warfare quickly degenerated into a primal battle for survival. It was bloody and muddy, and the rain transformed master swordsmen into prehistoric barbarians, locked in mortal combat with rocks and tree limbs and anything else they could use to their advantage. I'm sure it wasn't lost on some of the Zen priests watching from the mountain temples that they were probably witnessing the greatest unchoreographed display of wabi-sabi ever conceived. But that's how births are. They're messy, they're difficult, and they're hard. Peace and prosperity, though, it came at a cost. It came out of that struggle. Right now, our friends in Houston, they're having their own muddy, watery, floody battle. Homes are damaged. Normalcy's been replaced by chaos. But we know eventually order will return, homes will be rebuilt, and the comfort that's been lost will be replaced by a new and pressing need for additional finances. Opportunity presents itself as a solution. And I'm convinced that the Ambit opportunity will emerge there even stronger than ever before. People coming out there are going to have big whys. And I read this quote from Abraham Lincoln the other day. I think maybe he was our greatest physicist. He said the best way to predict the future is to create it. And see, I don't know about all that block time universe stuff. Here's what I do know. If you're not willing to do something different, then your future is already written. You're going to keep getting the same thing you've been getting if you keep doing the same thing you've been doing. That's for sure. I don't have to be a physicist to know that. But if you want to create a new future, a different future, you're going to have to do something about it. There are three groups of people that are here today. The first ones, they're brand new in our business. And you guys, you want to believe in a future of prosperity for yourself and your family. Maybe some of your past failures or some self-doubt are making that difficult. You got to pick up your sword and begin. You've got to let that all go, and you've got to understand that all of those past failures, all of that self-doubt, all that's done has made you who you are standing here before this opportunity, and you need to pick up your sword and begin. And the second group of you that are here today, you've already started down that path to financial freedom. And every day you get a new scar on your hands or poke yourself with the end of it. All that rejection and criticism pushing back at you. And I got to tell you something, the only way out is through. You got to keep going. You got to keep going. And then we got a third group here today, and you guys are already samurai. You've got the scars and the income to prove it. But let me tell you something. Nothing is permanent. In this business, you are either evolving or you're devolving. And true samurai never lay down their swords. Never. You got to keep going. You got people you're responsible for that you got to train up, and they're looking to see what you're going to do, and you need to pick up your sword and you need to keep going. Because let me tell you something, the future that you've already written for yourself, it's not as good as it can be. There's still more for you to do. There's still more for you to accomplish. We need all the samurai we can get in Ambit Energy. No matter which group you're in, you need to prepare yourself for the long, hard work of success. There's no finish line here. You'll have to practice whenever and wherever you can until the enemies of apathy and ego and selfishness and self-doubt, whatever it is that's holding you back, until you can cut it down with the celerity and the decisiveness of a sword stroke. You need to know that your scars and your flaws are not reasons to quit. They are reasons to keep going. They're proof that life's challenges have only seasoned you for what's to come. Damage hasn't disqualified anybody in Ambit. It's prepared you. You know, there's never been a better time to take advantage of the Ambit Opportunity Today. I believe that. But if you're going to take advantage of it, regardless of what you have or have not achieved up to now, you're going to have to be a samurai. You're going to have to put on the armor. You're going to have to put in the time. And you're going to have to do the work. Jerry and I and the team here at Ambit, we're committed to do everything we can do to provide an environment for your success, but we cannot do the work for you. Only you can. Only you can do it through discipline and patience. Can you put in the time and the effort to create the future that you want to have? The best way to predict the future is to create it for yourself. You have the power to do it. And Ambit is your sword. Guys, I hope the future you choose is a life of abundance and financial freedom. God bless you all. And may 2017 be the year your body, your soul, and your sword become a single thing that brings you the happiness that you desire. Thank you all for another great ambition.